Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Language Arts Gallery. Today, we're going to begin a new series of videos. We're going to be building on the most popular video on my channel, which is Introduction to Creative Writing. Now, if you haven't seen that video, that's linked in the description. But today, we are going to start a new course called Creative Writing 2. This is going to build on everything that we learned in our first course. We're going to practice some of the same skills, and we're going to expand to learn some new skills and some new genres of writing. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Please remember to subscribe to my channel here so you get all the videos in this course. So today we're going to begin with a warm-up. Then we're going to move to a free write where you're going to have the opportunity to get some of your ideas down on paper. For those of you who haven't taken my course before, we're going to talk about what creative writing is, and we're going to talk about the genre-based approach that we took in our first course and how we're going to apply that same approach in this second course. We're going to talk about life writing, poetry, and fiction. So we're going to review the genres that we covered in our first course, and then I'm going to give you an overview and some examples of some of the new genres that we're going to be covering in this course. So let's go ahead and get warmed up. I want you to think about the last time that you wrote something for yourself, not something that you had to do for school or for work, but something that you wrote purely for pleasure. And if you've never written anything before, I want you to take a moment, think about something you might like to write about. So for me, the last time I wrote something just for myself, I was trying to write a fictional story that was loosely based on my own life. It was really difficult. I thought it was going to be so easy because it was based on my life, but it was much harder than I thought. I had a really tough time getting started, but once I got going, then I really enjoyed it. And I always really love writing for pleasure. So think about what you wrote, why you chose that topic, and how you feel about writing for pleasure. So go ahead and pause the video, reflect on that, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I want you to think, what's the hardest part of writing for you? I think I gave away what the hardest part of writing for me is. And I've got a quote here that's attributed to Voltaire. It says, "Perfect is the enemy of good." Sometimes we try to be so perfect in our writing that it's really difficult to get started. Don't do that, okay? Perfection can kill great writing. Get your ideas down on paper. And that's what I want you to do in this course. I want you to focus on writing great stories. I want you to focus on the creative process to become more confident and remember that you are becoming a storyteller. Don't overthink the process. Get your ideas down. You can always go back and improve them. So since getting started is so important, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at 3 writing prompts, and I want you to write for 3 minutes. Doesn't matter what you write. I just want you to get started and write continuously. So I'm going to show you these prompts, pause the video, set your watch or a timer, and I want you to write for 3 minutes, okay? And here are our 3 prompts. The letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday. She had never seen the ocean until. If only I had turned left instead of right. Okay, so pause your video and go ahead and begin. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So I want us to reflect on this process. Not especially what you wrote, but I want you to think about the process itself. Did you find this difficult writing for 3 minutes? 3 minutes it's longer than it might seem to write continuously. Was there anything you found particularly challenging? Or did things get easier for you as you began writing? So I want you to reflect on the process and maybe jot down a few notes underneath what you've written there. And I want you to save that paper and I want you to refer back to it throughout our course. And if there's one line in your writing that you're particularly proud of, you can go ahead and highlight that. So now that we've got warmed up, let's talk about what exactly creative writing is. So we've defined creative writing already. We said that it's writing that expresses ideas, it expresses thoughts and feelings, and it does so in an imaginative way. So, given that it expresses things in an imaginative way, is creative writing always made up? No, it can include fiction and nonfiction. And if you remember, we talked about those three genres. We talked about fiction, poetry, and life writing. And life writing is nonfiction. So, why creative writing? We've talked about the importance of academic writing in so many of my courses. Why creative writing? Well, creative writing is fun. It's a way for us to express our ideas. And think about reading. Well, many of us love to read. And without great writers, without great storytellers, we'd have no great stories to read. So this course is your opportunity to be that great storyteller, to be that great writer. So it really gives you a chance to connect with your audience by telling a great story. So we've already mentioned our genres, that the larger overarching genres that we've covered already. Let's see if we can remember them. The first is life writing, poetry, and fiction. So we're going to cover these same large overarching genres in this course, but we're going to focus on different subgenres. So let's start with life writing. Who remembers exactly what life writing is? Life writing, we said, can be any form of personal narrative. It can be autobiography, biography, memoirs, letters, open letters, diaries or journals. It can be personal essays, which is something we're going to explore. But the important note is that this is nonfiction, and it's writing that explores some aspect of a person's life. In our first course, we talked about memoirs, and we said that memoir sounds like memory. And in a memoir, we're recounting a particular personal experience that we've had. Now, I want us in this course to focus on personal essays, which are similar to memoirs, but there are some really important differences, and I want us to go over them now. Okay, personal essays still talk about a personal experience, but they're really based on reflection. We're sharing an idea or an argument, and we're conveying that through personal experience. Now, we talked about reflection in memoirs too. We talked about reflecting on things as a terrific way to close our memoir, character reflection. And we said that we often learn a lesson that we share with others. The important thing about a memoir, though, is that lesson is for us as the author. In a personal essay, we feel that we've got a really important lesson that could apply to everyone, probably applies more broadly to all of society. And we want to share that. And the vehicle that we use to share that thought, that argument, is our lived experience that we're writing about. So that's the important distinction between a personal essay and a memoir. And we're going to talk more about that in our next lesson when we begin writing personal essays. So here we've got a table. I won't go over it in its entirety. You can pause the video and read through this here, but this is really the big distinctions, the big contrast that we're going to draw between a memoir and a personal essay. And the thing I really want us to focus on here is that when we're writing a memoir, we're really writing primarily to share a narrative with the reader, and this is a narrative of our own experience. Whereas with a personal essay, we've got this argument, we're really driving it home in our reflection, and we're taking the reader there by telling them this narrative. And again, we're going to build more on this as we go through our next lesson when we write our personal essays. So let's take a look at some really brief excerpts here. Okay, one of these is a memoir and one's a personal essay, and I'm going to go through them both here. When I was 8, I spent an entire summer on my grandmother's porch, listening to her tell stories about her childhood in the mountains. She would rock back and forth, the boards creaking beneath her chair, and speak of winters so cold the water in the pail froze solid. I didn't realize it then, but those afternoons taught me the quiet joy of simply listening, of letting someone else's memories become a part of your own. Now we've got our next excerpt, which is very similar. Spending that summer on my grandmother's porch taught me something our culture often forgets. Listening is as important as speaking. In a world where conversation has become a competition for airtime, we need to relearn the patience to truly hear one another. My grandmother's story showed me that listening isn't passive. It's an act of generosity. So, which of these do you think is the memoir, and which do you think is the personal essay? Now, if you guess the first one is the memoir, you're correct. And the second one is our personal essay. In this first narrative, the author is really just sharing her own experience and what she learned from her time with grandma. Whereas in the personal essay, she's sharing something that more broadly applies to all of society. She says, it taught me something our culture often forgets. So there's a larger message here. This applies to our culture, something that's become all too common. This is not specific to the author, but the author is using her experience to share that lesson with the audience. So I've already kind of given away the answer here to our next two questions. What's the author's argument, and how did they connect their experience to it? Well, here, the author's arguing that as a society, as a culture, we need to stop competing to be heard, and we need to listen to others. And she's linking this to her experience, that summer that she spent on grandma's porch listening to her. Now, again, this is just a very short excerpt. It's not the entire essay, but that's how our author is driving home this bigger point about culture and society. So now let's go to poetry. Poetry is a really special genre. It's a lot of fun to write. It's fun to read too. So what makes poetry different than other genres of writing, like life writing or fiction? Well, poetry is written to express the feelings of the author or the poet, and we want to evoke an emotional response from the reader. Now, poetry is a large overarching genre of which there are many, many subgenres, and this list here is not exhaustive, but we've got rhyme poetry, free verse, narrative poem, limerick, which are a lot of fun, acrostic poems, which are also fun, and haiku, which we covered in our first course. Now, something very important about poetry is that imagery plays an important role in poetry. We want our descriptions, whatever it is that we're describing to our audience, to invoke a sensory response from our reader. And we're going to talk more about imagery at the end of our lesson today. So in our first course, we talked about free verse poems, rhyme poems, narrative poems, and haiku. So hopefully you remember what all of these are. Free verse, we said, don't follow any pattern or rhyme scheme, and rhyme poems have the same ending sound at the end of each line. The word narrative means story. So narrative poems are poems that tell a story. Narrative poems can be free verse poems. They might follow a rhyme scheme, but the important component of a narrative poem is that we're telling a story to our audience. Haiku is a lot of fun to write and to read. It is a 3-line form of Japanese poetry, where the first line has 5 syllables, the second line has 7, and the third line has 5. And that was a lot of fun learning that genre with you guys. So in this course, we're going to expand on what we've already learned, and we're going to cover some new genres of poetry. The first is a cinquain. Now, we've got a particular line and syllable structure similar to a haiku, but a cinquain is 5 lines, and it follows the following syllable structure. 2 syllables in the first line, 4 in the second, 6 in the third, 8 in the fourth, and 2 in the final line. We're going to cover a persona poem. These are also really fun to write. This is a poem that's written from the perspective of either an object, an animal, or a historical figure. This is cool because you've got flexibility, you've got freedom. It's not like a syncane where you're really bound by that line and syllable structure. It can be as long or as short as you like, but you're writing it from the perspective of something else. And an ekphrastic poem is a poem that is linked to or inspired by a work of art. So this is going to be really fun when we do this because we're all going to be at the same starting point, which is a particular work of art, but we're all going to get to explore it differently. So I'm really looking forward to learning that with all of you. So let's take a look at a syncane here. Soft light, glowing so bright, whispers into dark skies, guiding my dreams on silver wings, my night. So we can see we've got that same syllable structure that we referred to earlier, 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, 2. And we see a lot of figurative or sensory language here. Now, if you've not taken our first course and you haven't covered this before, that's okay. We've got this light that whispers into dark skies. This is a great example of personification. Light can't whisper, only people can whisper, but the author is personifying that light or giving it human qualities. We've got a lot of descriptive language like soft light and glowing, dark skies, guiding my dreams on silver wings. So the author really creates this beautiful, hopeful image of what the night sky is like. Very often we think that the night can be dark and lonely, but this is a very different image or expression of what the night sky means to this author. The next one is a persona poem, and I think these are so fun. I tick away your precious time, counting moments you call mine. Silent witness to your days, I never pause, I never sway. So, who or what do you think is speaking in this poem? And you've got a great hint here. Of course, this is a clock speaking. The author is really, I think, giving a lot of human characteristics to this poem. I think when I read this, I think about how I interpret my time throughout the day. My time is indeed very precious to me. And I call these moments mine, my time. I need my time to do this. But the clock is saying, it's not your time. I control this time. I never pause. I never change. It always goes by at the same pace, right? So we really get an understanding, I think, of the object, but also of how we perceive time. So when we write this, this is going to give you a chance to be really creative and think and see the world through the figurative eyes of an object or an animal. Right? It could be a pet that you have, right? That's a really fun persona poem to write. So we're gonna cover that, and that's gonna be a lot of fun. And an ekphrastic poem. This is not a persona poem, it's an ekphrastic poem. Swirling stars twist in the night, blue waves crash with quiet light. Dreams dance on the village street where sky and earth in silence meet. Now, the important thing to note about these poems is, again, you've got some flexibility. They don't have to be rhymed. This poem does rhyme. We've got an A-A-B-B rhyme scheme here. But you're not confined by rhyming versus free verse. There's no line structure that needs to be followed. When we look at this poem, what artwork inspired this poem? We've got a very famous painting right here that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. And he talks about blue waves that are crashing with quiet light. And I really like that. We see the bright yellow here in the poem. I'm sorry, in the picture. And then we see these wavy streaks of blue where the yellow is really intertwined and mixed with the blue. And I love the way the author uses that really strong verb. They crash. The blue waves crash with the quiet light. Dreams dance on the village street where sky and earth in silence meet. So, wow, what a beautiful description of this little village down here. It's very quiet, right? Dreams are dancing. That's another great example of personification. I imagine that village must be very quiet. People are sleeping. The only thing that's out on the street is the dreams of the people who live in that village. And if we look at the painting, we can see here where the sky and the earth come together. So I think that's a really beautiful poem. And, one of the great things is that when we write ekphrastic poems, we can sometimes reflect on the artwork in a different way. So very often we see it differently. So think about after reading that poem, do you see that painting, Starry Night, any differently? Okay, now let's go to our final genre, which is fiction. Okay, so just like poetry, fiction is very flexible. You've got a lot of room to be creative. Something that I think is really important about this genre, because we're going to get away from what we did in our first course. When we're writing fiction, do our characters always need to be magical characters? Does it always need to be like a fantasy or a fairy tale? And of course, the answer to that is no. Fiction can be realistic. In our last course, we wrote fictional narratives. Now, we're going to review that really quickly. We said fictional narratives are made up stories. They have a beginning, middle, and end. Usually we tell them in chronological or sequence order. We've got characters, a setting, and a plot that can be imagined. It can be like a fairy tale, or they can be very realistic. And we talked about using dialogue and description to move the plot along, to develop our characters, and to give a really visual description of what our setting is like. So in this course, we're going to cover a different genre. We're going to cover something that's realistic. We're going to talk about one of my favorite genres of writing, which is historical fiction. So historical fiction is a made-up story. It's not true, but it takes place at a real time in the past. And we're going to look at an example so you can see this. It's based on real historical events, and very often, even though there's a story, the larger story that surrounds it, that's a real historical event. It's set in a real historical time period. It has made up characters, but it also can have real historic characters as well. And we're going to see that. One of the things I love about historical fiction is it helps us to learn about history and we get to enjoy a great story, which is really cool. So I want you to take a moment and think about a time period that you might like to write about, because we are going to cover this as we move through this course. So again, I won't go through this entire table, but here we've got a very clear distinction between a fictional narrative and historical fiction. So, in a fictional narrative, our setting can be anywhere. It can be real, it can be imagined. But in historical fiction, it's in a specific time period, a specific historical time period, a historical place, something that actually happened. Our characters will likely be a mix of fictional and real historic characters versus a fictional narrative where we've got mostly invented characters. And the plot in our fictional narrative, the story we tell can be made up, but the historical events are going to be real. That story's already been written, right? So I want to take a look at this brief excerpt, and this is very short, but this is a great example of historical fiction. In the chilly morning of 1863, Sarah pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as she watched the soldiers march past the small village. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and hope. Though she was only 12, Sarah knew this war would change everything: her family, her home, and the future of her country. That afternoon, news spread that President Abraham Lincoln would soon speak in a nearby village. The villagers whispered about his famous words, the Emancipation Proclamation, and wondered how his decisions might bring an end to the long and painful war. Sarah felt a flicker of hope kindled deep inside her chest. Now, as we look at this, first, think about the historical event or the historical time period. So, for those of you who are not familiar with American history, this is set during the American Civil War. Okay, and the Emancipation Proclamation was a proclamation that Abraham Lincoln gave, saying that African American people were free to join the North's military and fight against the South. Abraham Lincoln is a real historical character. Sarah is not a real historical character. We are making this up. Sarah being there, pulling her shawl over her shoulders, everything Sarah's feeling, that's made up. The stories that we are going to tell in a longer version of this, the stories that surround Sarah, they're going to be made up. The stories related to soldiers marching, this is a real historical event. President Abraham Lincoln giving the Emancipation Proclamation, that's a real historical event. We get a window into how Sarah's feeling. Okay, she knows that everything that's going on with this war, it's affecting everything in her life, her family, her home, her country. But with Lincoln about to speak and deliver this historic address, she feels hopeful. She feels things might get better. And that's something that people at that time probably felt. So even though this is a fictional story, we're conveying what many people very well might have felt at that time. Okay, so now let's go on to some text analysis. We are going to review the elements of story structure, which we covered in our first lesson. We're going to expand on them a little bit here to build towards what we're going to cover with personal essays in our next lesson. So our story structure includes our character or characters, our setting, our plot, and our argument or message. Okay, so our characters are who or what the story is about. Our setting's where and when the story takes place. The plot is what happens. Very often it's based around a problem and solution. And the argument or message is what does the writer want us to understand or believe as a result of this story? So as you're going through our reading, you can use this graphic organizer to help you outline the story structure. And this is a really cool tool that you can use when you're writing, when you're brainstorming your own writing, when you've got to write a narrative essay or a personal essay. This is an excellent tool. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at this here. When I was 10 years old, I had a bright red bicycle that I loved more than anything. It wasn't just a bike. It was my ticket to freedom, adventure, and exploring the neighborhood with my friends after school. Every day I would race down the street, feeling the wind in my hair and the sun on my face. One afternoon, after school, I went to the spot where I usually parked my bike, but it was gone. Someone had taken it. I felt sad and angry, like I'd lost a part of my world. I told my parents and they tried to comfort me, but I still felt upset for days. Then I remembered something my mother always told me. Sometimes losing something helps us appreciate what we really have. After thinking about it, I realized she was right. Losing my bike made me see how lucky I was to have a family who cared about me and friends who were always there. It also taught me to be more careful with my things. The lost bicycle taught me an important lesson. Things can be replaced, but the people who love you are what matter most. So let's go ahead and let's go through and let's try to identify the elements of story structure here. So, who are the characters in our story? Well, it's the narrator, and this is told from the first person point of view, and his mother. What's the setting? Well, it's his neighborhood where he lives. And the problem, what happens in the story? Well, the author begins by describing how much he loves his bike, so he does a great job setting the scene there. But his bike gets stolen. And the steps to the solution are actually the narrator's reflection. He begins thinking about things that his parents told him. Uh, and the solution is that he realizes what's really important is family. And the argument or the message is that the people we have in our lives, the people who we love and who love us, are far more important than material things that we are attached to, like a bicycle. So we went over all of these things here, okay? How the character feels, the problem. Okay, so I'll let you go ahead and you can read through that story and highlight and reflect on that as you like. I want to talk about imagery because we're going to look at another text and I want us to really get a good understanding of what imagery is. Now, we've covered this extensively in our first course. When we look at the word imagery, we see the word image within. Image is something we see. When we create imagery for our reader, we're going to use our words, our description, to paint a picture in the reader's mind. One of the ways that we can do that is through sensory language, by thinking about what we're describing. What does it sound like? What might it smell like? What does something taste like? What do we feel? Sometimes we can use great figurative language. If we look, we think back to that historical example of historical fiction. We talk about the smell of hope. What a great description, the smell of hope. That really lets us kind of interpret what that morning might smell like. And here we've got a great visual description. The bright white walls gleamed under the fluorescent lights. A faint smell of smoke lingered in the chilly morning breeze. So there we've got that sense of touch, what we feel, as well as what we smell. Okay, so we know our five senses are hearing, sight, touch, taste, and smell. And as I said, we want our reader to imagine what's happening in our story. What do they hear? What does the setting smell like? What do they see around them? Okay, so let's take a look here at this text, and you can pause this and read it on your own. And I'm going to read it now for us. Starting a new school can be one of the hardest things a person does. Last year, my family moved to a different city, and I had to leave all my old friends behind. On my very first day at the new school, the hallways felt loud and confusing. The walls were painted a bright, echoing white, and the floors were shiny and cold beneath my feet. Everywhere I looked, groups of students laughed and talked like they had known each other forever. Wow, what a great job describing that setting. So, first of all, the walls being painted a bright, echoing white. So we're combining what we see, it's echoing. That's an appeal to our sense of hearing, but we're describing something we see. The floors not just being shiny, but being cold. I think we've all looked at tile floors that we look at them and they look cold. Also, I really get this feeling that the author feels very lonely at this new school. So let's continue. I felt like a small shadow moving through a busy crowd, invisible and unsure of where I belonged. My stomach was tight with nervousness, and my hands felt clammy as I carried my backpack through the maze of classrooms. Wow, what great descriptive language there. The maze of classrooms. Her stomach's tight. Okay, so that's really helping me to understand how nervous she feels. Let's continue. At lunchtime, I sat alone at a corner table. The hum of voices, clattering trays, making me feel even more alone. The smell of pizza and fresh fruit filled the cafeteria, but I had no appetite. Then a girl with bright eyes and a warm smile approached me. Hi, I'm Mia, she said kindly. Do you want to sit with me and my friends? So, what a great description of that cafeteria. We know what it smells like, pizza and fresh fruit. It's kind of a contrasting smell there. We all know what a busy cafeteria sounds like, the hum of voices and clattering of trays. So I really can imagine what a school cafeteria feels like. And then the author kind of changes here and says there's this girl with bright eyes and a warm smile. So I get this feeling something good's going to happen. Let's continue. Her voice was calm and friendly, like a gentle invitation. I hesitated, but the kindness in her eyes made me nod. Sitting with Mia and her friends, I felt the tight knot inside me begin to loosen. They laughed softly and asked me questions about my old school, making me feel seen and heard for the first time that day. Over the next few weeks, Mia helped me learn the school's routines and introduced me to other students. Slowly, the bright white walls didn't seem so cold anymore. I started to feel like I belonged. This experience showed me how important it is to reach out and be kind to others, especially when they're feeling lost or alone. A simple smile or a friendly question can change someone's whole day or even their whole school year. So I went over some of that great sensory language as we were reading. The characters in our story, we've got our narrator. We're not sure who it is, if it's a boy or a girl, but we know our narrator is feeling alone at this new school. Mia and her friends are the other characters. The setting is school, but the author changes the setting throughout, right? We're walking down the hallway, we're going through a maze of classrooms until we're finally in the cafeteria. And we can see as the plot moves along, she arrives at school, she's feeling so nervous. Then she meets these girls, and slowly she's starting to relax. She talks about that knot loosening. And then she says she's feeling seen and heard. So we can see how she's feeling much more comfortable now. And the argument or the message is the importance of being kindness and being kind and reaching out to that person who might be alone and how you can really make a difference in someone's life. Okay, so now I want to finish up with another free write. And I want you to take what we learned about sensory language and I want you to apply that in your free write. I want you to describe the setting. Try and write for 5 minutes. Okay, there are no people in any of these pictures. I want you to describe the setting. Any people you describe, you're going to have to make up yourself and think about what's happening. Okay, so here are these three pictures. So you can pause the video and you can try and write for 5 minutes now. Okay, so welcome back. You all did a great job. In our next lesson, we're going to begin working on life writing. So I want you to begin brainstorming. Remember, we said that personal essays are about something that we feel, a message or an argument or an idea that we feel is really important and broadly applicable to others. And we're going to share this through our own narrative experience. So I want you to think about a personal experience that you had that taught you something important about life that others also need to learn because it's broadly applicable to them. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you in our next lesson at the Language Arts Gallery.